Hello, my name is Jeff Perry, and I am with the City of Spokane's Urban Forestry Program. In this presentation, I will go over the history and evolution of our holding nursery, or more aptly, our root-growing nursery, and share with you the results of our labors. I feel the information I am presenting is of value to anyone who cares about growing and caring for trees, and has many implications in regards to understanding how we might improve root structure and establishment of new trees in our built environments. With that said, let's get to it. The purpose of having a growing nursery is to establish great trees in our urban environments. We all know the many benefits of having trees surrounding us, such as the mitigation benefits related to pollution and stormwater, the potential for reducing crime in our neighborhoods, as well as the many physical and mental health benefits. A growing nursery can also be a place to help create root systems that have a better chance of establishment when we put them in their final living spaces. The tree on the left is a hardy rubber tree, and the trees on the right are Katsura. These Katsura are part of 32 trees that create an alley from 29th Avenue to a flagpole in Comstock Park in Spokane, Washington. These two trees in the foreground are Katsura that were root washed in the fall of 2001 or the spring of 2002. All the other trees in this group were ball and burlap with the wire basket and burlap removed and the root flare at grade. The growing nursery also gives us the opportunity to try and resolve root issues that may adversely affect the health and structure of trees, that may lead to early death or possible failure of parts or whole trees, which would diminish the long-term benefits and increase costs associated with maintaining our urban canopy. As is the case with many things in life, the beginning is something that happens as an idea long before there is any tangible structure to it. In this case, the growing nursery started with an idea that Rich Baker, my mentor, shared with Jim Flott in the late 90s. Jim was the horticulture supervisor for the city of Spokane at the time. This idea evolved into the process that Jim has coined root washing, which he has demonstrated for many years now. I was fortunate enough to have been involved with Rich and Jim from the beginning of the evolution of this process. When Jim bid farewell to his position as urban forester for the city of Spokane, June of 2005, I was able to take that knowledge and experience and use it to help create the process we now use in our nursery. Up until the fall of 2005, after Jim had moved on and I was left to try and maintain the functions of urban forestry, I'd always viewed our nursery as a place to hold trees for a short stint until we needed to perform a root wash and plant them in the field. I admit I felt very overwhelmed and not sure how I was going to plant the 100 or so trees that were waiting in the yard for their new home, with only the help of one or two other people. In October of 2005, Rich Baker shared with me 2 letters that he had sent to Jim in regards to some thoughts he had about root structure related to what we were seeing in the field with root washing and planting in general. In those letters, he made a couple of statements and asked some questions that would change my perception from viewing the nursery as a place of holding to a place of growing roots. Once that shift happened, I no longer looked at the needing to plant all of the trees, but rather growing some roots. I had all winter to think about how to start this new process. Up until that point, most of our tree orders were for B&B stock and some container stock. The main reason for this is that B&B trees are easier to use for root washing than container trees, due to the different types of root structures that develop during the growing process. We hadn't been removing the packaging from the B&B stock since we were going to root wash them soon anyway. At most, we would peel back the top of the burlap for watering purposes, as well as to expose the flare. It became increasingly difficult to remove the packaging when the trees were in the nursery for more than a few months. This is when we started ordering more container stock, and by 2011 we were buying container stock instead of B&B. In this picture you can see exactly where the burlap and wire basket were before we removed it, indicated by the arrow. This is the current configuration of the nursery. It is well organized with 1 species per row, rows 6 to 7 feet apart and straight. There's room for 550 trees, but due to the necessity to rotate stock, there needs to be room for 100 or so new trees at any given time. Currently, there are 169 trees in the nursery. I believe the most we have had at any given time was 350. The soil on the site is composed of river outwash material, small pebbles to large river rock, and fairly compacted due to its history as the Long Lake Lumber Company before it was purchased by the city. In the beginning, as I have said, the nursery was for holding. As you can see in this aerial, as indicated by the red circle, almost all of the trees, about 50 or so, were packed in like sardines. During this phase, if we needed a tree that just happened to be in the middle of the pile, which happened a number of times, it was very difficult to get out since most of the root balls were between 24 and 32 inches. At this time, the nursery is also enclosed in this fence. By 2004, we were creating rows of species, which made a lot more sense, and as you can see, is starting to take on the shape of the current nursery. In the summer of 2006, the nursery was full, and this is about the time the realization of the importance of leaving room for rotating stock became apparent to me. The red arrow indicates the location of this tree, an English oak that was part of an order in 2004 or 2005. There were 15 of these, but this one ended up becoming too big to plant, so as you can see, it is now a permanent resident in the nursery. It has a DBH of 14 inch and is 35 feet tall by 35 feet wide. Again, here's the current nursery configuration. The green dots are trees, and the red and black dots are uninhabited tree sites. You see here several rows of trees that have been in the nursery for some months, and are mostly ready to plant. Staking of trees is fairly uncommon in the nursery, but on occasion we need to use stakes due to the timing of heeling them in. In the spring, if the trees have leafed out, staking short-term may be necessary due to wind. Ideally, we want to heel the trees in before they leaf out in the spring or in late fall when the foliage is falling. This is a report of the species and the number of trees currently in the nursery. Other information related to these tree sites are size, when they are heeled in, what nursery they came from, defects, and other pertinent information. Now it's time to move on to the process of getting trees into the mode of growing roots. The process that I will be sharing with you has remained consistent for the last 10 years or so, with the majority of modifications to the procedures being made from 2007 to 2012, when we were learning about root growth, best watering practices, best time to order, and to heel in, as well as other procedures that streamline the process. Of course, the first step is to reseed trees from the wholesale nursery. By growing trees for 6 to 12 months, and sometimes longer, we can purchase 1.5 to 1 3/4 inch caliper stock and grow it up to 2 inches by the time we're ready to plant, in most cases. B&B stock is much better for root washing than container trees, but I have found that container trees are superior in this nursery situation, which I will cover further in the talk. We all know that removing the packaging is very important for growing roots as well as trees, so that of course will be the next step. The picture on the left shows B&B stock and on the right grow bag stock. As you can see, we have removed the soil from around the root flare by using a hay hook as well as some water to spray off the soil. The surveyor arrow in this picture is 15 inches long to give some reference, and the alternating red and white bands are 1 1/4 inch each. It's a little deceiving because of the angle of the picture, but the depth of the soil is around 13 to 14 inches. In most cases, there is a direct correlation with the location of the circling roots and the depth of the root flare. In this case, we can expect the root flare to be 3 to 4 inches below the soil surface. When ordering container stock, it is very important to make sure that the nursery you're ordering from is very diligent about potting up at the right time to help ensure that the trees are not severely root bound upon arrival. The next step is to pull the circling roots out away from the sides, as well as removing soil away from the root flare. This involves damaging some of the roots, but if you are buying good quality stock, this will be minimal. For a while, we were using Ed Gilman's method of dealing with the circling roots by removing an inch or so of roots and material around the entire root mass with a sharp spade or handsaw. But I have found that in most cases that procedure is a little harsh, and using a hay hook to tease the roots out of circling is much easier and less destructive. In cases where the tree has been left in the container too long and the roots are near impossible to pull away, The Gilman method works well, but again, buying good nursery stock in the first place should help alleviate this issue. Here you can see we are washing the soil away from the flare of these ginkgo and a Japanese pagoda. This is not a full root wash, but rather a means to expose the flare to deal with issues like adventitious roots and SGRs. Here we are washing the flare as well as pruning some of the problem roots. In this slide, you can see that there were a lot of adventitious roots removed that were growing out of the rootstock above the flare. The pruners indicate the level of soil prior to washing. This is an example of Kentucky coffee tree where we left the root issues around the flare alone until the tree had grown roots for several months. I have found that when you are going to have to remove fairly large roots like this, the trees fare much better if there has been some root development before removing them. Here is the same tree, but from the other side, showing some roots that had been removed. This is another example of a pruning cut that was made after the tree had been in the nursery for some time. This is an SGR that needed to be removed prior to planting. You can see here a row of cork trees ready to be hilled in. In this case, we can access this row from the side, so we can get the entire row lined up before we add the healing in material, which makes the process pretty efficient. One person can complete a row of 10 trees like this from start to finish in an hour or so fairly easily. Also note the really bright yellow color of the roots. Here we have a couple of ginkgo ready to go. The arrow on the right is indicating an SGR that will be pruned some months down the road or at extraction from the nursery. The soil on the right is made up of decomposed chips and some of the material that comes in with the trees. This is the material we use as the base for the nursery. We have never added any soil to this mix, just what is created by the process. The picture on the left is of the chips we use as top dressing for water retention as well as nutrient cycling. The base material is added and then spread around the tree. In this case, the soil level will be a few inches below the root flare, but it would be fine if the soil was half the depth and mulch to top it off. This is an important step for the obvious reason that trees need water, but this also helps wash the soil into and around the root structure. As with planting a root wash tree, doing this helps stabilize the tree and also creates that instant contact with the soil it will be growing into. Now add the top layer of mulch and once again water well. You really want to get all of the soil and mulch nice and wet, so using 25 to 50 gallons of water per tree is not uncommon at this stage. Finally, place the irrigation around the tree. We use 0.5 gallon an hour net of FIM with a 12-inch spacing between emitters. We have 3 zones in our nursery, so we water one zone each day of the work week during the growing season when it's not raining. Also, it is important to note that the material between the rows is at the same level. This doesn't work if you want to grow roots. Part of the process of learning how to get to where we are now is trying this mounding method with one of the shipments we received. This actually caused a lot of problems, and we only did this once. Root growth was severely inhibited, it was hard to keep the trees watered, and towards the end of the 6 months or so, some of the trees were rooting into the existing rocky soil, making it difficult to extract the trees. So it's important to make sure that the base material and the mulch is level across the board between the rows. So, after all of that, we can now get on to the exciting part, the results of what we're doing. This picture is of some mycorrhiza that we find in the nursery. It's really fascinating the amount of mycorrhiza we see in the nursery on some of the species, such as oak and beech, and none whatsoever on other species such as cork tree and tulip tree. I have often thought that the process we are using for growing trees might be another great way to study other things like tree root fungal associations. These are tulip trees after being in the nursery for 6 months. They were healed in early April and extracted the following September for planting. When we heal in trees early spring, there will be a lot of root growth, and when we extract in the fall, this is what we would expect. If we put the trees in the nursery in the fall, the root growth will happen, just not as much, unless we wait until late spring to extract and plant. The picture on the left is a dawn redwood that was healed in fall and extracted the following spring. The tree on the right was in the nursery for 12 months from spring to spring. The container outline is very visible in this picture, giving you a sense of root growth. The extra container soil at the top was removed and the root flare fully exposed prior to planting. The hornbeam is on the left and the amber maple on the right. Both of these trees were in the nursery from spring to fall, and you can see substantial root growth on both trees. The picture on the right is in early April as we are healing in. The picture on the left is the same hornbeam in October of that year with lots of root extension and ready to plant. Here we are doing an inspection with a full root wash on a hornbeam just to see what was happening in the root mass before we planted. This tree had been in the nursery for 6 to 7 months and, as you can see, put on a very good amount of root growth. The flagging in the picture on the right is indicating the position of the edge of the container the tree came in. Here's a Zelkova, again showing great root extension. Kind of reminds you of Cousin It. This Austrian pine was in a shipment of B&B stock we ordered in the spring of 2011. It wasn't supposed to be on the load, and since the truck wasn't going to return to the wholesale nursery anytime soon, the nursery rep we had bought the trees from donated the tree to us. When we removed the burlap and basket, we found that all that was left of the root mass after digging was 4 to 5 2 to 3 inch diameter roots that had been severely damaged by the digging process. I didn't have a lot of hopes for this tree, but we pruned the roots and healed it into the nursery anyway. 18 months later, the tree appeared to be doing just fine and started to put on some new growth. So we decided to plant it, and this is what we got. This is pretty impressive. This is a tulip tree that was in the nursery for 12 months. You can see here that Lars is shortening some of the roots before planting. The main reason we do this is to make it easier to transport and plant the tree. By pruning, we also reduce the damage to the root system due to the reduction in weight during transport and while placing the tree in the hole. This is the same tulip tree in its planting site ready to be backfilled. An important thing to notice here, which is hard to see in this picture, the root mass has changed from a 16-inch diameter cylinder of soil and roots in the container to a 10 to 12-inch deep, 36 to 48-inch diameter pancake of roots to plant. In almost all cases, the depth of the roots shrink related to the flare and the bottom of the root mass while in the nursery and develops into this shape. During the renovation of Riverfront Park in Spokane, this tulip tree that was planted as a 2-inch caliper specimen for the Susie Forest program in 2009 had to be moved to our holding nursery in 2018 temporarily until we could replant it. The intent was to put the tree back near its original location, but that didn't happen. In April of 21, it got a new home at Finch Arboretum. Note that the tree is actually in a mound, which earlier I said doesn't work. This was done on purpose to keep the root mass from getting much bigger, and in this case, it did work for our purposes. Here you can see the planting hole that was built for this tree. Lars shown here gives a sense of the size and shape of the site. This tree was 20 feet tall and 5-inch caliper at planting. You can see that there is a large mat of roots taking up most of the planting well. These two children, along with their mother, watched us place this tree and asked if they could help, so their job became watering as we backfilled. Here's the tree a year and a half later. It is doing pretty well. The tree looks pretty small in this picture, but remember it's a 5-inch caliper, 20-foot tall tree. Here is an example of a hawthorn planted at the Arboretum. The roots were pruned and prepped before transporting, as you can see, and again the planting depth is only about a foot due to the reorientation of the root system in the nursery. So that is about it for now, but before I let you go, I would like to give recognition to Rich Baker, who some may know or at least know of. He is in the picture on the left. He was my mentor when I first became an arborist, and was instrumental in helping me develop the capacity to ask questions and find the answers. Our nursery is a direct result of Rich's questions and curiosity. I would also like to give thanks to Jim Flott for hiring me for the city of Spokane in the first place and giving me the opportunity to work with him and Rich during the early days of root washing. He is in the picture on the right. Without that experience, I am pretty sure I would not have been able to give this presentation. Well, that's the end of the show for now. Hopefully I've given you some information that you might find valuable. If you have any questions or would like to talk about this issue more, feel free to contact me at the email address provided. Thank you.